you very much, Alistair. And it is a great joy to be here to present to everyone this morning and to share the work on this project. Firstly, we also acknowledge traditional custodians of the country upon which we live and work. Today, I'm presenting from country of the Wurundjeri. And the land on which the Sydney Opera House stands is known to its traditional custodians as Tubagale, which is on country of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And we also acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Before we jump into the Opera House, we thought we'd share just a little bit about ourselves. At ARM, we've been very fortunate to have worked on a number of key sort of performing arts projects around Australia, starting with here on the top left, the Elizabeth Murdoch Hall, also known as the Recital Centre here in Melbourne, a beautiful 1,000-seat venue. We've done work across private schools as well. This is a building for Performing Arts Centre for St Leonard's. Work up on the Gold Coast, the home of the arts outdoor performing stage. Hayne Hall in Melbourne, which was very much a key project that gave us a sort of springboard into our work at the Concert Hall of the Opera House. Recently completed the Geelong Performing Arts Centre down in Geelong, and also the Melbourne Theatre Company in Southbank as well, alongside the Recital Centre. And I must say, our use of timber, certainly predates the Opera House. Timber is a fantastic material that I'm sure you all know and love, and it's certainly something that we've had a lot of enjoyment in working with on some of our significant projects in the past. This is the Elizabeth Murdoch Hall at the Recital Centre, and has this beautifully crafted timber interior with a kind of large-scale timber grain pattern, which is there specifically for acoustic reasons. And we had the pleasure of working with a company called Voss Joinery in Tasmania, who fortuitously, then we reignited that relationship and worked with them on the Opera House, which I'll take you through shortly. So just thought we'd start with some shots of some of our previous work. This is the salon at the Recital Centre, the smaller performing space within that building, which has etched within it the score of some of Percy Granger's famous Australian composer, some of his music etched within the panels as well. So timber is a material that we've certainly loved working with, and was then very important to the Opera House, which we'll take you through. So the concert hall is the largest venue at the Opera House. It sits amongst and beneath the biggest grouping of shells. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the the silhouette and the appearance of this building. It is obviously one of the world's most famous buildings, and so for us, a very important commission, and one that you certainly don't approach lightly. These are a couple of the characters. The Opera House had a fairly, some would say perhaps difficult birth. Bjorn Utzon, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, will probably know, is the Danish architect whose famous competition-winning scheme won in 1957, and he got the job obviously to bring the concert hall and the Opera House to life. But he famously resigned in 1966, and the person who had to take over from him was the guy on the right, Peter Hall. He was working for the Government Architect's Office in New South Wales at the time, and he took this project on from 1966 until completion in 1973, and quite remarkable really, because he was only 34 at the time, and was tasked with completing what would become obviously one of the world's most famous buildings. So moving then to what our scope of works was for the project. Really, it was spread across three main tranches of work. The first was fixing the notoriously poor acoustics within the space. Then there was some very key functional upgrades to make the building, and particularly the venue, work more efficiently and safer. And also, lastly, a very important part was improving the accessibility around the concert hall in some of the front of house spaces. Built in a different time, accessibility wasn't what it needs to be now, for instance. So starting then with the acoustics, the acoustics was really a response along a number of fronts. It was improving reflections, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail coming up. Looking at getting some diffusion in there, and again, I'll talk to that. Absorption and amplification, function. It was looking at things like theatrical rigging, automating lighting, fixing the stage and automating the stage, and then also making improvements backstage, so the anteroom space. And then key in the accessibility space was introducing a new passageway through the staircase, which I'll talk to, adding a lift to allow multiple levels of access, and then handrails and seating. So the concert hall itself, when we look at the building in section, you can see this sort of iconic silhouette of the building. This is the concert hall defined by this grey line. It's a 2,700 odd seat venue, the largest venue, as I said, within the concert hall. And what's interesting is it has other venues sitting beneath it. So it's very much a hard working building. It has a number of venues. It's got performances all of the time. And so the challenge for us was working in a live environment and our work needing to spread beyond the sort of strict domain of the concert hall. And it kind of spread almost to this yellow line, incorporating works in the foyer, and incorporating a lot of works above the ceiling, sort of in this space between the beautiful timber ceiling of the concert hall and these kind of iconic white timber shells. So very much a project that occupied a hell of a lot of this this large grouping of the shells. So this is a shot of the Peter Hall designed interior of the concert hall prior to us commencing the work. So really Peter Hall's most iconic work. He obviously had to fit within the shell design of Jorn Utzon, but he had to really solve a number of problems to deliver the concert hall within the space. It was very challenging. The client at the time was demanding a very high seat count, and trying to fit everything in within the shells that had already emerged and already been constructed was quite the challenge for Peter Hall. This space is very much dominated by two significant timbers. One is the white birch of the ceiling, which has this incredible sort of fan design leading to what's called the crown over the stage. And then the lower levels, the flooring and also the paneling around the stage and the box fronts, etc., is all Brushbox, a local New South Wales timber. And then if we just skip right to the end, this is how it looked post our work. And there's a number of these key elements that I'll take you through in more detail. But as I think I said at the outset, this is a World Heritage listed building. So any interventions that we made had to be very carefully considered and reviewed by heritage stakeholders, by planning authorities, and in-house opera house design panels as well. Sorry, just bear with me. So if we then turn to what some of the problems were within the hall, really, so the hall was notorious for a fairly poor acoustic. When orchestras play in concert halls, they're unamplified. So literally the sound that the musicians are playing is what you hear in the audience. And really the geometry of the hall was part of the reason for the problems that the hall faced. It's a very long building, so 43 meters from the front of the stage to the very back seats of the upper circle. And it's also very tall over the stage. And what that meant was that the natural acoustic energy that the orchestra is producing was tending to not make it to the far reaches of the hall, and a lot of the energy would get lost up above the stage and up in the sort of high reaches of the ceiling, meaning that depending on where you sat, you had a very inconsistent kind of appreciation of the music. You know, there were good seats, there were bad seats, and it was a very inconsistent result in the hall, which is not ideal for a concert hall. We did some comparisons against some of its contemporaries. So the blue dotted line is the concert hall at the Opera House. We compared it here to the Berlin Philharmonica, and you can see just how much longer it is. So we've aligned the front edge of the stage, and you can see just how much longer the concert hall is, and also how much more volume there is above the stage. We compared it to a newer building, Jean Nouvel's Philharmonie de Paris, and you can see that the venue in Paris sort of fits almost entirely within the concert hall, and then you're still left with the upper circle of the concert hall poking out, just really demonstrating how much longer and how much further the sound energy had to get to within the concert hall, and what a problem that was. So when orchestras are playing on stage, what they need is some level of reflection. They need reflectors over the stage to reflect that sound down to them so that they can hear themselves and also hear each other play. And one of the fundamental problems with the original reflectors that were in the concert hall, which are these that are shown on the photo, was that they really just didn't provide enough coverage over the stage. They were affectionately known as the donuts. You can tell obviously by their toroid shape. But yes, these were sadly sort of inadequate in terms of their coverage and didn't do the job that they needed to do. So one of the key interventions obviously we've made into the space are these new acoustic reflectors over the stage, known sort of as the petals. They are these beautiful sort of magenta curved shape reflectors. They have curvature on them that are designed to the acoustician's specifications to make sure those reflections are scattered to where they need to be, and their color is picking up on colors already within the hall. One of the key things that we were able to do along the length of the journey, as Alistair mentioned, this was a long project. We started in 2015 and the opening concert was then in 2022, so almost 7 years. The ability to prototype along the journey. So this is a few of us on stage looking at prototypes of these reflectors in the space, giving stakeholders and the client the ability to see these things in the space, test colors, test reflection, test size, test shape, etc. And that was one of the beauties of this project, and a real kind of necessity to be able to see things in the space prior to actually construction. This plan picks up on a number of the new elements that we've added to the space to fix some of the acoustic problems. As I mentioned, this new reflector array sit over the stage and they do various jobs. The pink ones are there specifically to reflect sound to the musicians, the orchestra members on stage. These four larger reflectors at the front are quite interesting. They're larger and they're angled out towards the audience. And what that does is push the sound energy from the orchestra out into the far reaches of the hall, solving that sort of length problem that the building had. And there are some reflectors for the choir as well. We've also introduced a series of operable reflectors that fold out from the side walls that are shown here in blue. And they provide reflections also for the orchestra when they're close to the stage. But then when they're out here over the audience, they're providing reflections for the audience and helping, get with better clarity for the sound as you're listening. As I mentioned, the reflectors over the stage, where we ended up with them was to really lean into the magenta that was existing within the hall. So the color that you see on the seats is original. This is a photo of the original seat prototype from 1973. And Peter Hall had a fantastic quote where he said that people weren't going to walk through muted grey interiors here, that people are much more capable of assaults on their senses. And he likened it to sort of modern pop music at the time. And so he had chosen some fairly strong, bold colours, including this magenta. And after much sort of testing for us, we certainly thought that that was the right answer as well to sort of lead into that. If I turn now to the side wall operable reflectors, the ones that provide reflections to the orchestra and to the audience. This is a shot from our working Rhino model of the concert hall. The purpose of this slide really was to show that whilst it was a very sort of nice idea to fold these things down from the wall, the challenges that we faced were just a kind of cacophony of structure, services, all sorts of stuff in behind the walls that made it quite challenging to fit these mechanisms in to have them operable. Their intent was so that when they fold away, that they're kind of almost invisible aside from a panel joint. Working with our theatre machinery experts, Theatre Plan, who are a UK-based consultancy firm, they came up with this sort of quite ingenious design where the reflector would fold down like this. The acousticians needed a curved surface under when the reflector was deployed to again sort of provide the right level of reflection and scatter the reflection where it was needed. What that meant was that the reflector couldn't simply fold up because then you'd have a curved surface sitting against a flat wall. So the design of sliding it down meant that when it was shut, it meant you could have the original timber on the top, also leaning into the fact that it would then help make it disappear and then make it less of a heritage consideration as a change. And then this is a shot of them in the space. So you can see that they sort of sit flush with the original wall. We were able to salvage the original timber paneling from the wall and have it added to the to the new machine, and then all you see when shut is a new panel joint. You can see it in one of the new overstage reflectors as well, sitting in the space. Cutting those reflectors into the sidewalls was certainly not a job for the faint-hearted. The room was fully birdcage scaffold, so these photos were some of the photos we took from site. This is us sort of standing kind of on scaffold 20 meters up in the air, and the contractors would pin these guides to the wall, and then some poor sod had to be the person that would drop the circular saw into the wall, and fingers crossed, make a nice clean cut to be able to salvage the original timber face, because it was very important to us that the original timber faces be preserved and then added to the new machines. So this is one of them fully cut out. So this has been, as I said, cut out on scaff. You can see all the sort of stuff that's in behind those walls, but it's ready there to have new machinery added. And this is kind of the landscape that people were working up in. So we're right up against the ceiling of the concert hall here. These are the ceiling baffles that are there, which look much smaller, I must say, when you're down 20 meters in the auditorium. But it was quite a sort of rare privilege to be able to walk the scaffold and be up amongst this kind of quite beautiful timber landscape, all beautifully crafted and beautifully manufactured by the original contractors in the 60s and 70s. This is then a shot of one of those salvaged faces that has been successfully cut from the wall. These were obviously catalogued and numbered and then reallocated to the right machine when they were finally installed. Our heritage architect quite often said to us that he was of the belief that all of the white birch within the room came from one tree. Now we don't necessarily, we sometimes struggle with that because that would have been a hell of a big tree, but certainly there was a lot of book matching of the grain and a lot of end grain matching as well. So as I said, very important to have kept the original panels and have them sit seamlessly in the final walls. And then this is a shot of those reflectors folded down, so you can see that curved surface, which is all new new white birch, and then they obviously fold up and disappear against the wall. So that was a little bit on the new reflectors that we added into the space. One of the other key acoustic measures that we did was introducing what's known as acoustic diffusion, and I'll take you through what those panels are, but where we had to introduce diffusion was around quite a number of walls within the hall. So certainly all of the entire sort of lower bowl, including the stage surround, had new timber diffusion and was completely rebuilt. And then a number of these walls at the very back, shown in red here, had new diffusion as well. And what these panels are designed to do is to scatter the sound. And that's important because when you're sitting in the audience, you don't want to have a direct reflection of, say, just one instrument from the orchestra coming at you. You want to get a blend of all of the orchestral members on stage coming to you. And so these diffusion panels scatter the sound and give you a sense of envelopment, or the idea that you're sitting kind of amongst the full orchestral experience. So for us, when we approached this task aesthetically, we very much fell in love with the idea of trying to visually capture the idea of sound. This image is an image of water sitting on a loudspeaker with music playing through it. And these sort of hark back to experiments that maybe some of you did as kids. Certainly, I can recall doing experiments with sand on plates that get vibrated by music, and quite amazing what sound can do from a pattern perspective. It kind of creates amazing sort of ripples and really quite beautiful patterns. So this was very much an idea that we lent into to try and come up with an aesthetic for these new panels. This is what we were replacing. So there were a number of sort of fairly flat and fairly drab, it's fair to say, Brushbox timber panels that were, these are adjacent to the stalls. These were not the original panels. These had already been changed in about 2010 in an effort to try and improve the acoustics, but again, that hadn't solved the problem. But yeah, this is kind of the before shot. And then what we've replaced them with are these, certainly in our view, what are quite beautiful sculpted and carved panels, which have irregular waves through them. which, as I said earlier, is designed to scatter the sound. So it's a non-repetitive pattern, so that the sound waves bounce off irregularly and help with that sense of envelopment and diffusion of the sound. This is a few more shots of them. So these ripples were, quite challenging for us to sort of model, but then obviously also, presented quite a challenge to turn them into reality and for the contractors to make them. This is a shot from the wing in the backstage. We're looking through the stage door here, which has these beautiful sculpted timber panels as well. What was very important too was making sure we did it in Brushbox. So Brushbox is obviously the predominant timber, as I said, in the lower level of the hall. Very important from a heritage standpoint to keep new interventions in the same timber in the Brushbox. And what's quite nice about the space now is even if you go in there and you didn't know these weren't original, they do sort of blend in very well, certainly obviously tonally and texturally with the existing timber, still providing that kind of cohesive design that Peter Hall had there originally. As I mentioned earlier, with the overstage reflectors, prototyping was very much key with these elements. Presenting the idea of capturing sound was, again, sort of perhaps easy to say, but then to actually demonstrate that to clients and stakeholders and heritage panels was another thing. And so we needed to do that via prototypes. This was very early on in the job. I think probably around 2016, we created these. I think these were about 1 meter by meter panels, which served their purpose at the very first point. Later on in the piece, this was around, I think, 2018, 2019, the house sort of bit the bullet and were prepared to build a full box front as a prototype. And this was very key for us as a design team because it gave us a few learnings. And one of the key learnings was what you can see here was to eliminate the idea of any harsh lines like this. So you can see you can imagine what's sort of happened here. These panels have been made, these panels have been made, and then when they've come together, obviously there's no continuity of grain. So that was one of the key learnings from this prototype that we were then fortunate to eliminate in the final panels. But you can see here, heritage and stakeholders all meeting, reviewing, touching, seeing, standing back, and the ability to see these things in the space was very, very much important to the design process. COVID was interesting. COVID hit just as construction started. For me, being based in Melbourne, that was difficult. Having worked on it, it meant I couldn't get up to site as often as I wanted. That meant samples would get sent to my house, which was quite a lovely byproduct. Having some of these pieces delivered to your house was not a bad thing, but it was inordinately frustrating not being able to be up there whilst some of the fun stuff was happening. I thought I'd take you through a little bit on the process for how these panels were made, these diffusion panels. So this is an excursion we did down to Voss's, so Voss Timber and Joinery. As I said, they're the subcontractor who made all these panels. They're based in Tasmania, and this is a trip we did to their factory, again, probably in about 2019, looking at some of the prototypes. So, I mean, it's obviously a step-by-step process, but they take Brushbox, it gets sort of sorted to size and then pressed into panels. And then those panels would then get kind of rough cut. First, there'd be a rough cut pass on a 5-axis CNC router. And then a finer grain. So this machine would go over it in 2mm passes to create those sort of final sculptural surfaces. And this is some of the raw Brushbox straight off the machine. A panel like this would take sort of 7, 8, 9 hours on the bed. So it was quite an investment in time, obviously an investment in material, but they produced these quite sort of almost sand dune-like when they're not finished surfaces, which were quite beautiful. It was quite a complex process to get to that endpoint as well. For us, it meant modeling these things, obviously in CAD and in 3D programs. We used a few programs to come up with the panels. This is a shot from our Rhino model. That was software that we certainly used, but we had a workflow that also went through 3D Studio Max for certain aspects of it. All of that to allow us to visualize it, but then also provide models to the contractor so that they could then build from those as well. So that obviously then had to turn into shop drawings so that Voss could actually build them. So we would obviously get these shop drawings to review, which had all the detail on them. We would exchange 3D models as well to check that the geometry was not being lost in translation. This is a shot from their fabrication model, showing the kind of workings in behind one of these panels, how the fixings worked, how this is. In some of the panels, there are mechanisms in there for roller blinds and things like that. But they were quite complex fabrication tasks, and it was quite satisfying to work with committed subcontractors like these guys who really put their heart and soul into the process as well, and were very committed to achieving what was a very high outcome. Things don't always go smoothly though, and these are some shots that still make us a little queasy to this day. Timber, as we all know, is a natural material, and natural materials are prone to reacting to the environment that they're in. So when a lot of these timber panels were put in, given the tight nature of the program, the concert hall itself wasn't fully conditioned. The mech system wasn't back up and fully running. It was a particularly wet summer over, what would it have been, 2021, 22, I think. And so that level of humidity causes a few issues where some of these panels would literally start to pull themselves apart. That was quite sort of nerve-wracking and somewhat harrowing. You can see some effects of things growing. You can see things pulling apart. And after much hand-wringing and certainly correspondence back and forth with main contractors and subcontractors, etc., Voss were quite remarkable in being able to repair all the damage. And obviously, what was key was getting the space conditioned as quickly as possible so that the timber was stabilized. And we had gone to quite great lengths to specify a very low moisture content for the timber so that it was going in fairly stable. But then, of course, the atmospheric conditions within the room prior to it being conditioned were problematic. But all's well that ends well on the day, and the panels in there now are fantastic and have all been repaired. And these are some of the shots from the finished result. So this is a shot on the stage, a shot of the rear stalls wall, and then a shot of the opening concert. So on the stage as well, as I said, the stage surround, and you can see diffusion panels here, and then at the backs of the panels as well. And this obviously also shows the new acoustic reflectors over the stage and the sidewall acoustic reflectors as well. So they were a number of the key interventions, and most of them obviously in timber as well, that we had to employ to fix the orchestral or unamplified acoustic music problem. The concert hall is very much a versatile venue these days, and it hosts anyone and everything from the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, who are a resident company there, but to bands as varied as the Wu-Tang Clan, to circuses they have in there. They have school functions, they have state funerals, they have TED Talks, comedy. You kind of name it, and the concert hall will host it. And what that means is that the room needs to be adaptable and flexible, and have the ability to react to different acoustic needs. So when someone like the Wu-Tang Clan is in there, they're obviously amplified, and that changes what the response is in the room. When it's amplified, you actually need to dampen down the room. You need it to not be as reflective, and so you need a lot of drapery. This is the solution that was there prior to our works, a very sort of ad hoc, kind of not very architectural, not very aesthetically pleasing outcome of sort of just draping as much black cloth in the room as possible, draping it over surfaces to try and dampen down the sound. So one of our key brief aspects as well was to improve this, improve it on a number of fronts. Certainly, obviously, aesthetically, but improve its functionality and improve the ability to change over between an orchestral performance and an amplified process. Because all this stuff took a lot of labor, took a lot of man hours, and a lot of people to rig it within the space. And the house were very keen on having a sort of one-touch, one-button solution to having drapes here, and then have a sort of ready-to-go system. So this then is a shot of the final outcome of that. So we have a number of automated drapes that deploy from the ceiling, from the crown, and from the sidewalls as well at the push of a button. So these drapes all are just controlled by the stage management system. The operators can press the button, these things will drop down. They provide the level of absorption needed around above the ceiling to sort of tampen down that acoustics. In those new diffusion box fronts, we also have automated drapes that come out from flaps that fold down again at the touch of the button. And then there's drapery that the stage surround, is all set up much easier than what was there previously. And certainly the intent was obviously to give it more of a design aesthetic. So again, leaning into the magenta of the room and having it more, certainly in our view, visually appealing than just the ad hoc black drapes. And that's some of the box front panels that are there as well. So yeah, one of those key functionality upgrades was very much to do that and improve the changeover ability between shows, which just means less costs, more safe, a more safe working environment as well for the Opera House. So if we then turn our minds to outside the venue, and as I said right at the start, one of the other key aspects of the project was to improve the accessibility around the place. So built, obviously, opened in '73, a very much a different time in terms of accessibility. And if you wanted to get to the northern foyer, for instance, which is one of the grandest spaces within the Opera House, you had to climb this sort of fairly daunting set of stairs. There's 50 rises here, including an unbroken run of 32, I think it is, rises up the back here. Certainly things that you couldn't build today, and obviously with good reason. So one of our challenges was to work out how to get people through to the northern foyer, whilst not obviously having to climb a mountain to get there. Because I mean, it's fair to say that the population of, say, a Sydney Symphony Orchestra performance tends to skew older, tends to skew to people who perhaps may have more mobility challenges. And so very much a key part of our brief was to solve people's ability to get from spaces to spaces within the front of house spaces. So for some design cues for that, we looked to some of the work that even Jorn Utzon had done in his time before he resigned. And he had conceived of having passageways through the staircases. And this is a shot from stage one of the Opera House prior to him leaving and prior to Peter Hall taking over. And these are some of his drawings as well. So there were certainly clues from what he had thought as to how we could approach this task. And then this is the final shot of the final result. So we did carve a sort of new passageway through that grand staircase. There was much prototyping, much design iteration to be done to work out what the final solution, what the best outcome would be for this design sort of outcome. A process that took quite a long time, and a process that needed to not be taken lightly, because this is some construction shots of how we, of the interventions that were needed to punch a hole in that stair. It's kind of very much the old adage of measure twice, cut once, because certainly once you're, jackhammering these heritage listed stairs, there's no turning back. But the end result was the creation of this new passageway that linked the southern foyer through to the northern foyer at grade, allowing people with mobility issues to get all the way through at grade, not having to climb that daunting set of staircases. And here for us, we took some cues from some of Peter Hall's fantastic timber geometry. We deployed it somewhat differently, and we used a different material here. We used bronze paneling instead, and that's a material that is familiar at the Opera House, but this helped to signify that this was a new intervention, but still had some design cues that made it, certainly feel part of the Opera House family. And that passageway then led through to a new lift, again, clad in bronze. You can see here some of the original fabulous carpet. Again, some of the bold colors that Peter Hall had chosen, these fantastic purple and magenta carpets in the northern foyer. And then the concrete work in the Northern Foyers is truly amazing as well. That's all stage 1 stuff, so stuff done with Jorn Utzon, and the quality of those concrete beams was phenomenal. And so, again, the challenge of inserting a new lift into these kind of sacrosanct spaces was not one done lightly. Again, lots of design iteration to work out where best this should fit, how it can be slotted in with minimal or as little heritage intervention as possible, whilst absolutely transforming the way the building would operate. And then this has moved up a half level. This shows the lift, how it's cut into the stair. The Northern Foyer is quite a tricky space. It has 5 different levels, sort of half levels and levels. So double-sided lifts now gives you access to all levels of that fantastic space. But again, not something done lightly. These are construction shots of that lift in progress. We carved enormous holes through some of those beautiful concrete beams, and need to put a lift shaft through, tore holes through the Northern Foyer glazing, all of the stuff which certainly had the heritage architect probably losing some sleep, had us losing some sleep, and you have your fingers crossed to see when they pour the new concrete, when they finally strip that formwork, you have your fingers crossed that it's going to come off looking good. And fortunately, again, credit to the main contractor and the subcontractors. All of the work and the quality and the craftsmanship is first rate, as it needs to be at such an iconic building. And then these are some of the shots of the lift at its upper levels. So again, sort of stitching it in with existing staircases, stitching it in with existing glazing within existing structure, and then also how it ends up at the very top level, level 4. And if you ever do go there, look, I encourage you to take a ride in this lift. It's fantastic. It's a glass lift. It kind of has a Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator quality to it. When you come up to level 4, you're then confronted by this fabulous view of the harbour. We worked very hard to not have any lift machinery up or visible at this level. So, you do sort of emerge and have this fantastic kind of reveal moment when you get to the very top. And again, just a final shot of the work on the interior of the console. But thank you. That's hopefully given you an insight into some of the work that we did over the 7 years, particularly some of the timber work, but also some of the other aspects of the project. So I think I'll hand back to Alistair and we can go through some questions if there are any.
Thanks for that, Andrew. It is such an absolutely amazing project. It's a credit to you and all the team that were part of it. It obviously took up a big part of your life for a while.
It certainly was. Yeah, 7 years is nothing to sneeze at, but a very enjoyable process all the way along, working with great people. And as I said, full credit to sub-consultant teams, contractors, subcontractors. It really was, one of those projects that was a joy to work on.
Look, there must be a mountain of questions I would have thought from the audience, so please put them in the Q&A and we can certainly put them to Andrew. As an engineer, actually, one of my first sort of projects back in the 90s was working on Princess Theatre. So not knowing anything about theatres and coming in and just, it's a whole new world with what happens backstage and, things you don't appreciate in an audience member. Just incredible. And even just on this project, the work you had to do from an engineering perspective, particularly that work sort of carving out the concrete and putting in lifts.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just amazing. I couldn't believe the beautiful concrete beams and things you were showing as well, which would have initially been hidden away. Yeah, just exceptional stuff. I was really interested also, and a little bit frightened, like you said, when you spoke about the timber coming in and the space wasn't conditioned, because clearly that's sort of a message we always give to designers about making sure wood is in that conditioned space. And I do recall back, Sydney was hugely humid at the time. But what moisture content were you initially sort of tackling? You said it was quite low.
We had specified at 9%, I think, from memory, which Voss went to quite enormous lengths to get the timber to that prior to bringing it up to Sydney. So they had refrigerated, and climate-controlled shipping containers that they had down at their factory to, acclimatize all the timber. So they sort of did everything they could at their end. We had, of course, covered everything in specs to make sure it was going to go into condition spaces. But, the reality of building sites and buildings with type programs is things don't always go to specs. Let's put it that way. But, as I said, it was fairly harrowing for a few weeks. But again, credit to the team. They managed to pull a rabbit out of the hat and fix all the imperfections without, anyone being able to go there really now and telling that there was ever a problem, which is quite remarkable.
It's such a huge space to get that conditioned. It would be quite a challenge, I would have thought. Yeah. Diana's got a question here. Any particular reason for the purple colour in the carpet? Was it the purple, the royal colour back in those days?
Look, I mean, Peter Hall, as that was an original Peter Hall colour that he chose. One of the best, I think I said it during the presentation, one of the best quotes that we found from him at the time was that, times were changing. It was 73. He, as I said, I think he likened the strong colours that he was choosing to ones that Matisse used, the artist Matisse at the time, and also likened it to, the people's ability to cop more assault on their senses due to the modern music. So these were some of the thinkings that he had in his mind when he chose those colours. And those colours are so iconic within the building that they were obviously never something that we were thinking should be or could be changed. So for us, it was very much working within those existing colour palettes, which we think are fabulous, and leaning into them with new elements where we thought it was appropriate.
A good question here from Sergio. How did the final acoustics live up to the original modelled intentions and the satisfaction of the performers?
Yeah, well, look, thankfully, couldn't have been better. And that is also one of those sort of hold your breath moments. I mean, I'm not an acoustician. I had spent a lot of time with our acousticians over the seven years. They were, Gunther and Jürgen were the Germans from his company Muller BBM, who were fantastic to work with. I was privileged to be there when the Sydney Symphony Orchestra had their first rehearsals there. And look, it was fantastic to see their reactions. They were just delighted. It's fair to say, it has lived up to what everyone had hoped. And again, that's not us sort of just saying that. That's thankfully what everyone is saying to us. It was good enough that it moved, Opera House CEO Louise Herron to tears during one of those rehearsals, which was lovely to see. And just from our standpoint, seeing the joy on the musicians' faces when they could, because it's a room they obviously knew very well. They played in it for, many of them for decades. And so as soon as they started playing, they could tell, something's different. And it was quite a joy to watch the joy on their faces and then see them move around the room to listen to their colleagues performing. So thankfully, it all worked out.
Yeah, that was fascinating to hear from the orchestra's perspective. That's all sort of unamplified. You sort of expect things to be amplified. And when you showed that sort of dimensions of the hall, it really is a long way from the stage to that back section as you were illustrating. The question here from Catherine, I'm not sure how much you can share here, but certainly if you can, it would be of interest. What was the budget of the project and how did that go in terms of final cost? It was such a long project, 7 years. It must have been a difficult thing to sort of cost up front and get to the end.
Yeah, and I mean, look, it obviously had many things happen during it. Nonetheless, it was COVID. I mean, construction started February 2020, and we all know what happened in March 2020. So that was a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing for the contractor in that it meant all the other venues below it were closed, so they could hammer away sort of 24/7 and not worry about noise issues. So it had some program benefits, but then some of those program benefits were sort of offset by material shortages and all that sort of stuff. I mean, look, the published budget was around 150 million, and look, to our knowledge, I think it probably ended up around there, but that's probably about what I can say. But nonetheless, it had some challenges along the way, certainly with factors beyond its control, let's say.
This is another interesting question, which I was contemplating myself. Yeah, can you tell a little bit more about the negotiation with the heritage officers? How'd you get them to approve changes to such an iconic building? And any thoughts of alternative approaches which would not change some of the original features? So that, yeah, how did you go with them? Because they must have been cringing when they were seeing some of the things you were suggesting.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a very sensible approach. The Opera House had a heritage consultant engaged. That was Alan Croker from Design 5. He was fantastic to work with throughout the project. So he was part of the consultant team. So we were always running design iterations through him. The Opera House had set up their own design advisory panel with a group of eminent architects that we would also need to present to and get, sort of the tick of approval from. We obviously also then had to clearly, communicate with New South Wales Heritage. There are a number of things, I guess, where the heritage people realised they had to take a sensible approach, that change was necessary. And so Alan Croker had created the most recent conservation management plan over the whole building. And what that did was grade things out as to what sort of tolerance for change there was to certain elements. And clearly with things like the lift and the passageway, there was a real necessity for things to change. So people knew that something had to change. So it was not a case of, well, you can't touch that stair, you can't, put a lift in the northern foyer. The building had to adapt to modern needs. And so the task for us was to do these things in the best heritage approach or best heritage method possible. And so that was just a constant dialogue really with stakeholders and internal and external stakeholders, and bringing everyone along the journey. And as I said, prototyping, being able to show people things before they were built, being able to render and visualize things and show people, all those tools we had to use to our advantage to, communicate and to get people convinced that it was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Mario was asking you what type of timber was used. I think you did mention it was white birch and Brushbox.
Yeah, so the ceiling, everything you see kind of above the seats, that lighter color is white birch, and the lower timber is all Brushbox. I mean, an interesting thing with the white birch was the house were very prescient back in the day, and they had stored and still have stocks of white birch veneer in some of their storage units around New South Wales. So where we needed additional white birch veneer for some of the new machines or some things like that, we were able to draw on stock that the Opera House already had. They had done things like also store existing glass, which helped us when we were building the lift, for instance. So they were quite a sort of ahead of their time, perhaps, or very forward thinking in that they had stocks of original material that we could lean into. And some of the material we've taken out, some of the old flat Brushbox panels have gone back into storage, so have the ability to then be reused and recycled and repurposed for other things at the house, should the future demand it as well.
Okay, that was going to be my next question. Yeah, where you found some of the white birch in particular, and then even the Brushbox, that was things that they had already, or was it sort of new Brushbox you were using as well?
Most of the Brushbox for the diffusion had to be new, obviously because it was need to be thicker and be carved, etc. And that Brushbox was sourced all locally and sourced from one supplier and sourced with all the right, chains of custody, etc. Voss, that was all in our specification as well. So they sourced the quantity they needed for all that new Brushbox. But where we could in the back house spaces, we refinished and reused existing Brushbox patterns, to repurpose them in the back house spaces rather than just, throwing the old out and starting with new. So we tried to, upcycle and reuse wherever we could.
Mm-hmm. Look, it's such an important thing, using local timbers and the beautiful Australian hardwoods that we've got, and ensuring that they come from a sustainable and renewable and certified source is really critical for everyone. So yeah, we hope that we continue still to get access to some of our local hardwoods going forward. I know some of the forests have been shut up in New South Wales and Western Australia, but we certainly hope we can continue to access those. Well, we've got a question here from Christine regarding access for users with disabilities. Were there any considerations for tactical elements to be added to the ground, she asks. It seems quite dark in the passageway on the way to the lift with the purple and bronze if someone was visually impaired, and also around nosings to stairs.
Yeah, look, tactiles and nosings are ones that were certainly considered, and they were very interesting discussions because there's a number of things with the stairs that are certainly problematic by modern day codes. Certainly the goings and rises of those treads in the northern foyer don't meet modern standards. And again, this is sort of talks to the heritage aspects of what, where where's the line that is acceptable to meet obviously modern accessibility needs, tick the heritage box, and sort of balance all those outcomes. So they were very kind of key discussions that we had with our accessibility consultants, as well as the heritage architects. The decision was made to not do tactiles and not do nosings. Nosings would have been particularly difficult with the sort of bull nose on those precast panels. Tactiles was seen to be too much of a heritage intervention. I certainly fully appreciate that means that it may prove more challenging to accessible users or people with needs. I guess the house kind of counters that a little bit by having front of house staff there at all performances and on tours, etc., to help people with needs. To the question about the passageway, I mean, that lighting and color contrast and everything is all compliant. I mean, you're right, it does look dim, but it does meet all the codes for accessibility in that aspect.
There's a question here that's not totally clear, but asking about how do you treat accidents with timber and will the panels be replaced? I'd imagine those acoustic panels are pretty solid things. They probably don't get too damaged with people just in there. But was there any plan around that? Did you have any problems with materials coming in?
Look, there was the odd bit of timber that was damaged, during construction, obviously. I mean, they were protected as much as possible. And obviously now in day-to-day use, there will be the odd knock and things like that. The panels have the ability to be refinished by hand and touched up, certainly to my knowledge. The other thing, though, is that even that sort of ripple pattern does tend to hide sins a little bit. If they've not taken, too huge a knock, obviously something huge will, be visible. But yeah, being a natural material, it has the ability to be refinished, sealed, etc. But they're also such beautiful things that I think what we've found is that people tend to take a bit more care around them as well, just naturally. They sort of love them so much that, but look, accidents happen, but they can be fixed.
They are just such amazing panels. I couldn't believe what you were saying, 7 to 9 hours on the bed to produce them.
Yes.
Incredible, almost artworks and pieces of art, aren't they?
They are, and I mean, again, like if people go there, I certainly encourage you to run your hand along them. They're these sort of beautifully tactile surfaces, and it's amazing, what you can do with timber, certainly these days as well.
I was also really interested in one of your early slides when you were sort of showing the panels up near the ceiling and all behind you. You were showing one of your Rhino models there, and that looked hugely sophisticated. How much time went into building the Rhino model of the work you did there? Was it a pretty sophisticated model in there?
It was very sophisticated. So we were fortunate that we got a Revit model from the Opera House, but over the course of our part of the project, we had to really rebuild that. We had to get surveyors in to do point cloud scans of everything and then remodel things to make sure it was totally accurate. We had people up in those spaces behind the walls, point cloud scanning to try and identify where the structure was. We would then have to complete models where they were incomplete, etc. So I mean, look, yeah, there's probably, I hate to think, probably years of work in those models, which were absolutely necessary because we were, with some of those wall reflectors that came down from the wall, we were talking, down to sort of 2 or 3 millimeters tolerance. I remember being up there sort of 2 weeks before opening, and some of them weren't quite shutting flush because they didn't have enough space, and we were really arguing about 5 millimeters at times. So it's funny how buildings like this come down to those real things.
That's fascinating to me because following over the sort of past decade, the interest in building information modeling and trying to get people to actually invest in that, all the effort you put in up front, but the benefits you get, not just for construction or refurbishment, but for that ongoing maintenance. I'm not sure if you were able to go to this level of detail, but you almost built that BIM model for the Sydney Opera House, which has such high value going forward.
Absolutely, and look, they have their own BIM department there, so we did hand back our sort of as-built model, and that has gone to that team who, have done modeling of other parts of the building. And, their goal is very much to have a very live, accurate model of sort of the entire facility because they do use it for facility management, et cetera, and it is an incredible resource for them with future projects.
Rio's just asked here, are the ripples calculated to have specific frequency effects on top of the aesthetic look?
They weren't calculated per se for frequency effects. What we did get from our acousticians were certain parameters that we needed to hit. So we needed a non-repetitive pattern. That was number one, and then we needed certain amplitudes. So the ripples needed to kind of go from 0 to 70 mil, I think it was, on the deeper panels, and from 0 to 30 mil on the shallower panels. So there was kind of dimensional criteria, not specific frequencies, but the acousticians were more interested in the randomness of it, if that makes sense. And that randomness was gotten by us creating a non-repetitive pattern.
Mm-hmm. Look, we're just on midday, and Catherine's just made a comment here, which I totally agree with. Congratulations, Andrew and the team. Such an iconic project and such an absolutely incredible result. It really is. So, yeah, thank you from everyone on the call today. It's been a really amazing project to learn about. This is the second time I've heard about it. I was just as fascinated as the first time. So thanks.
Thank you, Alistair. It was a pleasure. Very, very nice to spend time with everyone.
Just a reminder to everyone that the webinars are recorded. So if you'd like to watch this again, and you probably will, or you'd like to let your colleagues know, yeah, just go to the WoodSolutions website and that tag with the webinars there. It'll be posted probably over the next week. Also, our next webinar will be in a month's time on Tuesday, the 4th of June. This one will be about connections in mass timber bracing systems. So this should be really interesting for those people that are sort of active in the mass timber buildings. And we've got two engineers from Timber XP speaking about that. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed it. I'm sure you have. And we thank Andrew once again, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future.